Good afternoon. I'm Jack Kyung Lee, Dean of the Graduate School of Education at the University of Buffalo. Welcome to GSC, Dean's Distinguished Lecture. I know that this is the first day after spring break, so this is really a test of your enthusiasm about the topic, and I'm very excited. Okay, first I'd like to thank the sponsors of this event. Adele H. Land Memorial Fund, Charlotte C. Aker Fund for Colloquia on Urban Education, and the UB Center for Educational Innovation. I also want to thank all of you for joining us, including our university President Tripathi. This year's theme, Personalizing Education for the 21st Century, should resonate with all of us with the college experiences. If your college classes were too boring or too difficult sometimes, that means education was not optimally personalized for you. Currently, the education is losing its race against the technology. However, the combination of the new technologies and the learning analytics together can empower educators for innovation. And that's why I invited Dr. Timothy McKay, a thought leader and innovator in this field, to share his insights. Dr. Timothy McKay is an Arthur F. Thurnau Professor of Physics, Astronomy, and Education at the University of Michigan. Professor McKay is an internationally renowned scholar and data scientist. In astrophysics research, he probes the growth and nature of the cosmic structure, as well as the expansion history of the universe. In education research, Dr. McKay does learning analytics, working to understand and improve the post-secondary student learning outcomes. In 2015, for example, he founded the Digital Innovation Greenhouse, an educational technologies accelerator within the University of Michigan Office of Academic Innovation. Higher education is going through transformation, and University of Buffalo has been a national leader in student success and completion initiatives, such as Finishing 4. We look forward to learning more from the experiences of our peer university, University of Michigan, where Dr. McKay has successfully led educational experiments for student success. After his lecture, there will be time for Q&A as moderated by Dr. Shufeng Liu, GSC professor and the director of the UB Center for Educational Innovation. And reception will follow afterwards upstairs, so please stay through the reception. Now, please join me in welcoming our distinguished speaker, Dr. Timothy McKay.
Thank you. It's a real pleasure to be here and to have a chance to talk with you about this topic, which is consuming a tremendous amount of my own attention and attention on our campus. What I want to do today is to talk to you about why it is that I think we need to personalize education in the 21st century, and how it is that the combination of information technology and the analysis of the data that it provides is going to enable us to do that. I'll be showing you along the way a variety of examples of work that we've been doing at the University of Michigan, and reflecting a little bit on what I've been seeing happening in other places as well. Before we do that, though, I'd like to start with a little bit of a history lesson, to think about what it means to educate at scale and how we got to the point that we're actually doing that. So this is a picture of University Hall, constructed on the University of Michigan campus in 1871. This lovely building was built at a time when the total enrollment of the university was 1,200 students. And yet when they built the building, they included in it a theater that would seat 3,000, because they knew they were headed for bigger things. Public higher education was invented in this country to create citizens for our society, and that is not a small task, not one that can be done for a limited elite group of people. It's a large-scale task. all right? So no small plans were being made. This is a picture of that University Hall auditorium. It was a very beautiful auditorium that was big enough at the time for them to hold all main campus events, campus-wide events in this auditorium. All the students and the faculty could get together in one place on campus at the same time. So graduations and events like that were held in University Hall. Now, this was just the beginning of the growth of public higher education. So by 1900, enrollment in the university had tripled to about 3,500 students, and the industrial era, both off campus and on, had begun. Over the next 50 years, enrollment would expand by an additional factor of 10. Imagine living through a period of time where growth was happening at that kind of pace. That is the era in which we invented the methods and approaches that we use in modern higher education. I think we stand at a similar point of transition where we're going to see higher education over the next couple of decades change in ways that are analogous to the ways they changed between 1900 and 1950. So Michigan became a model of a public research university, a really giant place. It became impossible, of course, to hold events, campus-wide events, indoors. We don't have any place big enough to do that. So by 1949, we were running our commencement outdoors in the football stadium of the time, Ferry Field. You can see this nice processional going into that field. I love this picture because it shows kind of what's happened on our campus. This is that same 1949 graduation. So you can see the football stadium as it was at the time in 1949. And if you look in the background, you can see the emergent new football stadium, something that is called the Big House on the Michigan campus. It seats 115,000 people. It's the biggest football stadium in the world. This entire region is now the athletic campus, that whole region. So things have changed on campus. I also love this picture because it shows the graduates filing into their different sections of seating. And I haven't confirmed this, but it looks to me like they're sitting by grade point average. Right? There's some kind of distribution there. Anyway, a lovely old historical picture. It's important to remember where we come from. By 2010, commencement is taking place in that Big House Stadium. This was a particularly packed commencement because you can see that the speaker at this one was Barack Obama. That drew a little bigger crowd even than usual, so the stadium was full. So the 20th century began with a kind of industrial revolution. That happened both off campus and on. And public higher education joined this industrial revolution and invented a bunch of things that were needed to industrialize education, to get it to scale. A bunch of bureaucratic industrial approaches, things like standardized tests and credit hours, GPAs, majors and minors, all of the things that seem unchangeable in education were actually invented during this period. They aren't unchangeable. They were created to do large-scale education, to enable large-scale education. And I think of large-scale education as something that was done in the 20th century in a model that's reflected in this picture of Henry Ford's assembly line, right? It's a system designed, a single system designed, and with some serious effort to optimize it for perhaps the median student. But it's not optimized for every student. It's actually optimized for something like the median student who's present. We've recognized that this kind of industrial education isn't really perfect, and one sign of that is that if you go back to the 1960s and 70s, you'll find university campuses beginning to try to find ways to personalize education, even though they're teaching lots of people. So this is what's called a Google Ngram view. I don't know if you're aware of this, but you can look up any word or phrase, and it will tell you with what frequency that word or phrase appears in all of the scanned books of the Google Books project. Kind of an interesting way of seeing what have people been talking about at different times. And in this example, you're looking at the phrases learning community, academic advising, and freshman seminar. And you can see that all those words are essentially absent until you get to the 1960s, and then they start to appear, and then they really take off. And I think these are what I would call early efforts to personalize, even when we're teaching at scale. I think my sense is on our own campus, and probably on yours as well, that these are great efforts, and they do a lot of good on our campus, but they're also pretty thin. So academic advising, for instance, on the Michigan campus, we have a wonderful suite of professional academic advisors, and they talk to most students just 1 or 2 times during the time they're on campus. It just isn't really personalizing education in the way that we would like. It's a good start. It's a sign of a need to personalize education. So the 21st century began with another kind of revolution, with an information revolution. And change has already begun to happen in education, even though it doesn't fully feel like that yet. Almost all educational activities that take place on our campus, or let's say at least many of those activities, are digitally mediated now. They take place through technology. And what that means is that they leave a record. They become visible in another way so that we can understand what's going on. We can learn more about our students than we ever have. And that kind of data is what's going to support the next generation of personalization. It is possible to attend to and react to every individual student on our campuses, no matter how many there are, something that was really impossible in the 60s and 70s when we started to try to do this. So what does it mean to attend to and respond to difference? First of all, every student on our campus is unique. There are no two people who are the same, and recognizing and responding to that difference is what's always happened with great teachers in small enough environments. That's what teachers do. They come to understand their students as individuals, and they make adjustments to the way they interact with those individuals, to what they ask them to do, to the feedback they give them, and so on. This kind of personalization has always been essential to excellent teaching. It's also essential for equity. If we're going to build a system and say, here's one uniform system, and then bring people into it who are not themselves uniform, we will get a distribution of outcomes that depends on the distribution of inputs. We're not actually providing an equal opportunity for success to every one of those students if we give them an identical system. If we really want to get everyone to success, we have to be able to adapt to the individual students as they come in. So how do we respond to difference at Michigan? There are times when we do it very well. And this is a crucial aspect of the experience that students have on our campus. They take many courses which are quite small. They engage in research experiences and in one-on-one kind of advising, especially in the disciplinary realm with inside their majors. But we often also fail to personalize education, and probably the worst place where this happens is when people are together on really large scales. So in our large introductory courses, with general advising that we try to provide to everyone on campus, and also with building community across the campus. How well do we connect all the different groups of people who are on campus? How thoughtfully are we able to do that? That's a place where we also fail. So I think that when we have better data and we use that data wisely, we can make a big difference in this, and we can personalize education much more effectively than we have in the past. So why do we do this? Why do we educate at scale? We educate at scale at Michigan because this is our mission. We are a public research university. It is our goal, our purpose in existing to educate thousands of people. We teach 9,200 courses at Michigan, and about 100 of those courses provide a third of all the credit hours on our campus. This is because there are a set of subjects that just many, many people need to learn. We need to teach statistics, introductory statistics, to 2,000 students every semester because we have 2,000 students who need to learn introductory statistics every semester. That's what we do. We teach a small town statistics every semester, right? This is not a weakness, though, right? This is a good thing that we're doing this, and we need to learn how to do it really well. Okay? It's a core function for us. It's one of the things we do for democratic society. Now, in order to educate well, we need to personalize at scale, and that means, first of all, that we need to attend to every student. We need to know about them. We can't have them be invisible, faceless people who we don't keep track of. So we need to know about the student as a student, so we want to see what they do, to assess what they know, and to represent their skills and accomplishments really well. If we can't represent their skills and accomplishments really well, we don't really know what it is that they're doing. So thinking about how it is we reflect on and represent what students are doing is central to this. In addition to knowing the student, as a kind of learning model, we also have to know them as a person. They come in with a background, with a set of interests and goals that are really important for being able to educate them well. We need to help them identify a sense of purpose. We need to understand whether their affect and their sense of well-being is good. If we can't do these things well, we can't educate people well. So there are a lot of ways in which we need to attend to every student. But imagine we had a data set that allowed us to know these things about every student, and all we could do is have an individual person look at it. That wouldn't be enough. We need also to be able to act at scale. We need to be able to do things that will learn from everyone, learn from the experience of all the people that are here, to attend to them, watch them all in a way in real time, and then to deliver actionable information to individuals in the community, first and foremost to the student themselves. No one can personalize better than the student themselves. So to be able to go directly to and interact with the students, also faculty and staff, and we need to be able to communicate at scale in rich and humane ways. Okay. So what's going on with learning analytics? Why are we doing this? We're doing it because by combining data with information technology, we can accomplish this goal. We can personalize at scale. But there are a bunch of major challenges to doing this. First of all, we have to learn how to gather and share and analyze and use this knowledge while protecting privacy. The point isn't to broadcast information about everyone to the world in a way which might be uncomfortable or even illegal for the students. We also have to think about what it is we measure and how we report it. We have to focus on measuring and reporting the things that really matter and not just the things that we happen to measure right now. Right? It's really essential. If we don't do that, we will drive toward a lowest common denominator kind of solution. And then we have to be really thoughtful and ideally very creative about the way we put this to work. So there's lots of things to do to realize this vision. But the opportunity is there, and all we have to do is act in the right ways, and we'll be able to do it. Okay. So I want to tell you a little bit of the history of what's happened with learning analytics at Michigan, and then I'm going to go on to show you a variety of examples. The first thing that happened at Michigan that we never give enough credit to is that we have a set of information technology professionals on our campus who have been responsible for gathering and maintaining our data systems for far longer than we've been doing this work. They were doing this work for a decade before we ever came to look at it. And they deserve an important part of the credit for enabling this to happen. They created the infrastructure on which all the learning analytics work that I will describe is built. Then for a period between about 2006 and 2012, a number of locally led faculty efforts began to emerge. My colleague Gus Everard began building a thing called the Academic Reporting Toolkit, and I'll show you the descendant of his original Academic Reporting Toolkit in just a little bit. Its purpose was just to put data into people's hands, to let them ask and answer their own questions. Stephanie Teasley in our School of Information recognized that as soon as we turned on learning management systems, and initially we were using a Sakai learning management system that was grown up on campus, we had access to information about what students were doing in classes and to the authentic products of their work. We could see things about education that were invisible before. So she began working on that. And I began working with my colleagues to explore introductory physics. What happened then was a campus-wide conversation about learning analytics emerged, something we called the Symposium on Learning Analytics at Michigan. It was really started by myself and Stephanie Teasley. We just said, let's have a seminar series, and we invited ourselves in to speak, and then saw if anybody else wanted to talk too, and we brought them in, and just started a conversation about this. That seminar series continued into 2015. Okay? Out of this initial purely faculty-led action came something called the Learning Analytics Task Force, which was launched by our provost in 2012. He put together a team of 12 faculty members and charged us with working on opening up data access and reconsidering the way we govern data access so that we could support real learning from this data, to make it accessible to all the people who should be doing useful things with it. He gave us some money, a couple $1 million, to run an Exploring Learning Analytics Grants program. That enabled us to invite in the community to think about how they might like to use this data and give them some support to be able to do it. After that, we also ran something called the Learning Analytics Fellows Program. This was a kind of training course for faculty and graduate students who wanted to learn more about learning analytics, to think about what they might do with the data, to explore projects of their own. That Fellows Program has since turned into a massive open online course called Practical Learning Analytics, which runs as an open access course on the edX platform right now. This Practical Learning Analytics MOOC provides people with an opportunity to think about learning analytics activities. We provide the students in the course with extensive amount of data and some real code that they can use to explore the kinds of things that we've been doing. What's going on now is, as this task force has come to an end, we're working to institutionalize the things that came out of it, to make them permanent. One of them involves rationalizing data, and I'll say a few things about the learning analytics data architecture. Another involves doing more institutional research. We have both the Michigan Institute for Data Science doing research like this and a committee called the University of Michigan Institutional Learning Analytics Committee. And then I'll spend a good bit of time talking about this Digital Innovation Greenhouse, whose purpose is to put data to work, supporting student success and a variety of research endeavors. Okay, so that's kind of the arc of this. We've got a little introduction now. I've told you what it is, how we got to where we are. I'm going to talk about 4 different things for the rest of this talk. I want to say a few words about ethics, about what we're doing and why we're doing it. I want to take a little aside to talk about measurement, data collection and management. Then I want to talk about 2 different ways you might use data. One is analysis. modeling the data, trying to extract meaning from it, to learn from the experience of everyone. And then I want to talk about action, putting the data to work, actually doing things with the data, supporting decision-making, creating the motivation for change. And our goal really is to personalize education on our own campus in a couple of years, to make it much more meaningfully personalized in just a few years. Okay, so let me first say a few words about ethics, what it is we're doing here and why we're doing it. So we sat down a few years ago at a conference center in California called the Asilomar Conference Center to have a discussion across a number of higher ed institutions about what principles should govern our work in learning analytics. What kinds of norms of consent are really appropriate? And of course, in the world of human subjects research, there's a long-standing understanding of how to think about this. Things are a little bit different in the learning environment because our students come into a learning community like this with an explicit desire for us to know a lot about them and to act on that knowledge. So it's a little bit different. So at these two Asilomar conventions, we held one in 2014 and one last summer in 2016, we had conversations about this, and our goals were to generate a set of principles for ethical conduct, not rules, not laws or anything like that, that would guide the creation of local policies. Everything that we did there was inspired by the spirit of the underpinnings of human subjects research today, things like the 1973 Code of Fair Information Practices, that you shouldn't gather data about people without them knowing that you're gathering data about them, and the Belmont Report, which of course led to IRBs and things like that. At Asilomar, we outlined 6 big principles, 3 of which come essentially directly from the Belmont Report, and then 3 of which we added because of the specific nature of learning analytics. So the first 3 are the respect for rights and the dignity of learners. This is protection of privacy and transparency. Beneficence, that you should maximize benefits and minimize harm. And justice. The idea of learning analytics is to benefit everyone and to reduce inequalities. And this is a very important one for me because I think it's an important role that analytics has to play. These are all principles that are part of the Belmont Report that gave rise to IRB offices in the 1970s. We also wanted to acknowledge the importance of openness. If we're going to do learning analytics research and learn things about, for example, how you might recognize a student who's at risk, that should be done openly. And right now, there's a kind of conflict going on. There are a lot of companies that are selling products that would help you identify students who are at risk, and they may or may not want to be open about the algorithms that they use. We think it's pretty essential that they should be open, both because we believe in that kind of spirit of research, but also because if we don't know what's going on in algorithms, how can we trust the results that they have? Right? It's very important. It's consequential for people. So openness is important. The humanity of learning is something we wanted to recognize, that you can't just reduce everything that happens in the learning process to a few numbers. We want to think about that. And then the last part has proven incredibly important, which is continuous consideration. Everything that's happening in the world of information technology and data about people is changing fast. So there's no question that whatever we're doing here, we're going to need to keep working on for years going forward. So we thought about all these different things. Let me give one example. I've talked to a few of you about this earlier today. One of the first things to emerge in learning analytics was what people call predictive models or predictive analytics. And what predictive models really do is use the past performance of students to understand what has happened in the past. They're reports of what's happened in the past. And these kind of so-called predictive models only predict the future if you don't change anything. Right? So if your goal is just to predict the future and not change anything, they're fine as predictive models. But what we really should be doing is using these things to learn from the experience of the past. So how should we act if past students haven't achieved their goals? If you find out that a group of students hasn't been successful? Well, there have been some campuses that have decided they would like to get those people off campus as early as possible so they don't count in their retention rates. Right? So this famous phrase, drown the bunnies as quickly as possible, was used by a short-lived president of a small university. Right? So that's one way you could go. You could say, I can predict that you're not going to succeed, let's get you out of here. But that's crazy. That's not what we should do at all. Instead, we should recognize that if some students in the past haven't achieved their goals, we have to do something about it. We have to create new, better, personalized systems of support and help those students succeed. Okay? So I think that we learn from the past in order to change the future. We don't build models to predict the future and then live with its consequences. We need to learn from the past. Okay, one of the models that I think about a lot, and we talked about this morning, some of you were with me, is the learning health system that is emerging in the health sciences. Extensive data now is gathered about patients and their outcomes as a matter of course in the health system. And the Institute of Medicine has recognized this and called for what they call a learning health system in which knowledge generation is so embedded into the core of practice of medicine that it's a natural outgrowth and product of the healthcare delivery process and leads to continuous improvement in care. I love this model, and so I think of it a lot when I think about building a learning higher education system. In the same way, we now gather extensive data about the process and products of higher education, right? We should use these in this way to take full advantage of the transformative promise of research in improving education to create a learning higher education system of this kind. And I've written about this in a couple different places. Okay, so that's a bit about ethics and why we're doing, what we might hope to accomplish. Let me talk a bit about measurement, about data collection and management. So the first thing is to think about the different things that we measure. There is a core group of data that every campus in our country has because you have to have it in order to run a campus. It's student information system kind of stuff. Information about students at admission, a kind of portrait of what they were like when they arrived on campus, a very complete record of their encounters with courses, every course that students take, who they take it from, who they take it with, when they take it, what the course is, what grade they get in it. Information about degrees and honors when they declare those degrees, what they graduate with, what kinds of honors they have. This is the stuff that's the standard issue elements of transcripts. It might seem a little boring, but there's actually tremendous amount of information in this student information system stuff that hasn't really been fully used. So I spend a lot of time working on this kind of data, even though it's in some ways the more boring part of learning analytics. What we're starting to record, due to the presence of learning management systems and due to digitally mediated education, is a very rich, exploding record of both the process of learning, what students are doing when they're learning, and the products of learning, the actual things that they produce as elements of their learning. So everything from click streams to video, discussion forums, all that kind of stuff that gives you ideas about what students are doing and when they're doing it and how they're doing it. And then the actual products, which contain very rich information about student learning, things like the essays that they write, the presentations that they give that are often recorded in the form of video and so on. Lots more information emerging that we're thinking about how to use. The goal is to put all this together to have a detailed and evolving portrait of every student's background, interests, goals, and accomplishments. To see them from the time they're admitted, growing toward the time when they graduate, and be able to use all of that information to understand their own experience as an individual, but also to understand what's happening on our campus, how our courses are working, what higher education is accomplishing. All of those pieces come together. Okay. Now, working with student data can be complicated. On our campus, the data warehouse that we have that houses our student information system data has a 157-page data manual that describes all the entries in it. They look a lot like this. There are about 200 organically evolving tables. What I mean by that is every term, new elements are added to these tables as new data is collected. Sometimes labels change with time. It's very complex, right? If you are a real data junkie, this isn't too scary. And you say, okay, give me access to the data. I'll go get it and I'll clean it up, right? But if you're not going to use this. So one of the barriers is cleaning and aggregation of data. And this is true in every data science application. When I was working on the Sloan Digital Sky Survey, for example, my students came to refer to themselves as data monkeys because most of their job was cleaning up data. And then at the end, they would do a little analysis, right? But really the hard work was getting good, clean data. So we've recognized this problem on our campus and come up with a partial solution for it, what we call the U of M Learning Analytics Data Architecture. So this is a product that we produce for our campus. Our IT organization produces it. It is a research-focused data set containing information about students who've attended the University of Michigan since about 1996. Right? And it has been created to put out a clean, user-friendly version of all the data that we have. The people who created this data access, or this learning analytics data architecture, we're thinking about the uses that people would have, and they tried to put into this data set things that would solve 90% of the questions people would raise. So in other words, they didn't do everything, because you can't really do everything. It's too complicated. But you go after some very substantial variety of the questions. This was created as a process, not as a product. So they didn't produce just once. They actually created the tool that generates this. So each term, as new data comes into the data system, they generate a new version of this as an automated kind of process. That also allows them to enrich this data set as time goes on. So in between those data releases, when they produce a new version, they can add new elements to it, new kinds of functions, and they then continue to come out. This kind of data release model was very much the same thing we do in big open science projects like the Human Genome Project or the Sloan Digital Sky Survey. In the background, there's very messy data. In the foreground, you create public data releases. So I think this is a model that's well worth considering in any any environment, probably worth the effort. So then there's a question when you measure things about how can you release information, by which I mean kind of the answers to questions, while still protecting privacy. Ideally, we'd like everyone to be able to learn from the experience of everyone who's come before. We want to be able to look at the data and answer questions about it without invading individuals' privacy. So one way of doing this is to use what I would call restricted reporting tools. Tools that let you answer questions based on the data, but they don't give you the data, right? And I will talk about a couple of these kinds of tools from our Digital Innovation Greenhouse in a moment. The other way, of course, to provide access to data and still protect privacy is to use the existing research structures, which we already have on our campuses. People do research with private data all the time in all different kinds of environments, and we can still use those. That's what the LARC approach is about. We created a data set that people can approach as researchers very easily. There are a variety of interesting new methods emerging in social science, which I find intriguing. We played with some of these methods for our Learning Analytics MOOC. Imagine you have a data set with all this information about students in your classes, and you would like to share the information in that data set without sharing the individual student data. So what you need is new data that has the same information in it, but isn't the student data. Imagine if there were 10,000 more students who took these classes and had the same kind of experience that your students did, but none of them were real. Right? You can create synthetic data which shares the same information properties as the real data, but none of which is real. And people are working on this as a method for privacy protection across a wide variety of social science research ideas. So that's something I find very intriguing. Perhaps one day it'll be possible to push a button and release a version of data that reflects what happens on every campus with no personal information in it. So people could really study what happens on campuses with no concerns about personal privacy. Okay. We also need to think about better measurements. As I said, measuring what matters is really important. It's not enough to just measure what we've already measured. So right now what we do is we measure grades. Grades are performance measures, but they're measured for a variety of tasks that we don't record. We don't know what was being graded. They estimate some outcomes. We don't know what those are, and they're quantified on some ill-defined scale. So other than that, grades are great. We don't know what they mean, but other than that, they're good. What we'd like to do is measure learning in a wide variety of ways. The increases in students' ability to do well-defined tasks or to know well-defined things, and we should focus on individuals' growth over time. So there are a bunch of ways to do this. In my own field, in the introductory STEM courses, it's become quite common to use pre- and post-testing methods as a method of measuring students' learning growth. That's pretty good, where the learning goals are pretty straightforward in that kind of way. When you get to more advanced work, it's a lot harder to measure learning in a way that feels reliable, but we're getting closer to being able to do that. And in fact, some data science methods may make it more possible to extract meaning from student work. There's a lot of interest in the learning analytics community now in things like natural language processing that would enable you to extract meaning from student writing. There's a lot of student writing in these systems. Right now, the only way we extract meaning from it is to have an instructor look at it and assign a grade to it. And then we keep the grade. But there's a lot of meaning in there. We might be able to do much more with that in the future. So we're thinking a lot about better measures of learning. We're also thinking about measuring other things that matter, not just learning. Liberal education is a lot more than just a list of classes and the grades that you get in it. Ideally, liberal education would be characterized by a mix of things. Performance, you want to learn a bunch of stuff and do well in those classes, but also intellectual breadth and disciplinary depth, a range of experiences. So I would say that in a liberal education, if you just sit in class for 4 years, you're kind of missing out on a big part of what it is. You should be sitting in class sometimes, but also doing other things, different kinds of things. Effort. I would love to have a rich measurement of effort on our campus and be able to reward effort when it occurs, right? We come to residential campuses in part to form networks of connection with people. And that's an important thing, something that we would like to be able to reflect on. So with all these different kinds of outcomes, ideally our portrait of students would be multidimensional in this kind of way, and we would be able to hold out to students both intellectual breadth and disciplinary depth, and say, think about your education. How are you balancing those things? What's more important to you? And to reflect on that in a way that feels as obvious as things like GPA. Okay, so how might we do one of these things? Let me just give you one example drawn from the work of one of my senior thesis students, Carr Epker. So what Carr did was to look at the network of course co-enrollments on our campus. It's something we have a very good record for. If you took a class with someone, we know it, right? So what he did was to form what's called a bipartite network. It has a set of courses at one level and a set of students at another level. And two students are connected if they take the same course together. So students are connected by a course. And courses are connected by students. If a student took both courses, the courses are connected. So you end up with a network of courses that are connected to one another by students, and students that are connected to one another by courses, right? It's a very well measured network because we have excellent records of it. But it's also kind of a thin network, right? Just because you took a course with somebody doesn't mean you know them or you had any much interaction with them. You did share something with them, but it's not a perfect thing. So then once you have this network of students connected by courses and courses connected by students, you can think of different kinds of measures. And the one that Carr focused on for his thesis was the diversity of connections. So you might take courses only with people in your major. Or you might take courses with people in all kinds of majors. And that would be a different kind of experience from one to the other. So he explored the isolation of some majors. Some majors are very isolated. But also, within a major, some students are isolated and some students are less isolated. This is an interesting thing to look at and to reflect on and to think about. So here's just a few figures. I'm just going to point out a couple things about it. First of all, this is a scale of isolation. If you're very connected in the major, you'd be toward the right. If you're very connected out of the major, you'd be toward the left. We discovered that on our campus, the most isolated major of all is musical theater. Not a very big surprise. We take in 24 students a year. They sing and dance together for 4 years, and then they go to Broadway. It's great, but it's not very connected to the rest of the campus. There was one person who was a joint English and musical theater major, who's much more connected than the rest of musical theater majors, unsurprisingly. Took some classes with other people. If you look at another field, a typical field like philosophy, you find some spread in the nature of people's connection, and you look up this person who really stands out, and that's a philosophy student who was also a pre-med. Took a whole bunch of large science courses, right? So they clearly had a different network of connection, a different experience on campus from the rest of the philosophy students. So you can begin to see that difference and maybe reflect on it, and maybe help students reflect on it too. That's the kind of thing we're thinking about with some of these new measurements. How could we reflect on the student experience in ways that better inform what's going on? Okay. So I've talked about ethics. I've talked a bit about measurement. I'm now going to say a few words about analysis, because the first thing you can do with data is analyze it to answer questions that you have. And I want to talk about two different examples of questions that were raised by faculty members and now are affecting the way we work with students. The first one has to do with placement exams. We use placement exams to help guide students through the pathway of courses, and the second has to do with classroom equity. So first, let me tell you about placement systems. The typical system of chemistry instruction in the United States is for students to take 2 semesters of general chemistry, followed by 2 semesters of organic chemistry. But at the University of Michigan, everything has to be different. So we have a Michigan version of things, which is that you could take 1 semester of general chemistry, 2 semesters of organic chemistry, and then 1 semester of general chemistry. But we insert into this process a placement exam. So you come out of high school, you take this placement exam. If you do very well on the placement exam, we say go straight to organic chemistry as a first semester freshman. If you don't do as well, we say go take general chemistry for 1 semester and then go on to organic chemistry and then to the second semester of general chemistry, right? So there's a pathway difference. This exam determines whether you spend this extra semester in general chemistry before you go to Orgo or go directly to Orgo. Now, obviously, the reason this was put in place was because instructors thought that if you didn't do well on this placement exam, you probably need to prepare more before you take organic chemistry. So that was the motivation behind it. Their sense was, if you didn't do this, you wouldn't do very well in this organic chemistry class, right? Because remember, there's a big cost in this. If you go down this path, you're taking another large introductory science course, very challenging. It takes a whole semester, so it puts you a semester behind everyone else. It's not without cost, this choice. So assessing whether that cost is worth it is very important. And so that's what my colleague Ginger Schultz went to do. What she did was to conduct an analysis that's called a regression discontinuity analysis. So imagine that you have the placement test score for everybody in this chemistry system, and then you look at their grade in a later chemistry class. You might expect that this placement test score would be related to grade, and you would find some kind of a line on this figure, right? What's happened, though, is that the people who were advised to go directly to organic chemistry get a set of grades that relate to their chemistry placement test like this, and the set of students who were advised to go to general chemistry first and then go on to organic chemistry get a relationship between their grades and their chemistry placement test scores that look like this. And there's a discontinuity between those two lines. That's because the people on this side have undergone a different treatment from the people on this side. And although this is not a random controlled trial, this kind of regression discontinuity analysis can make an assumption that the people who are close to the test score boundary are very similar, and look at the size of that discontinuity to estimate the effect of the treatment that's here, the treatment being taking the general chemistry course. So remember, the idea was go take general chemistry because it will boost your grades in these subsequent classes, right? What's being done here is to measure how large that boost in grades is. And it isn't very large. It's less than 0.2 letter grades. Not only is it less than 0.2 letter grades, but it's very difficult to sort out whether that is because they took this chemistry class or because they're a semester older. Like, all students improve their performance from their first semester to their second. So it's not clear that it's any bigger than 0.2 letter grades, and it's probably really smaller. So this has forced people to go back and rethink this, especially for students who want to accelerate through the chemistry program. This may not be the wisest choice for them to spend an extra semester doing this general chemistry class. It's given us the ammunition we need to really understand what's going on. Okay? So my second example comes from my own courses, Physics 140, a big introductory physics course, and it aims to probe whether or not our courses are equitable, considering gender and performance in introductory STEM courses. So this figure shows the relationship between grades obtained in other courses on our campus and the average grade obtained by people in Physics 140. And what's being shown here are small points with error bars, small error bars on them. Each of those points represents the mean and the error on the mean for the grade received in a physics class for students who have this GPA in their other classes. Okay? So it's a way of saying students who have a 3.5 in their other classes are going to receive a grade of about 3 in physics. Okay, they get grades that are lower than their GPAs, all right? So student performance is influenced by background and preparation. Grades in physics are related to grades in other classes. Right? You can see how these things are related. Okay? Now, if I take that same figure and I make it twice, once for male students in the class and once for female students in the class, you can see that there are substantial gendered performance differences in these classes. One way that we've started to talk about these gendered performance differences is to measure what we call the grade penalty of a class. If you compare for every student the GPA they have in other courses to the grade in this class, and then you average that over a group of students, you get something that we've come to refer to as the grade penalty of the class. So if you sign up for physics, you're going to get a grade lower than you're used to getting. And that grade penalty for male students in this data set is about 0.3 letter grades. For female students, it's about 0.6 letter grades. A substantial gendered performance difference. Okay? So these performance differences remain when we account for all the measures we have of background and prior preparation. So we can throw in standardized test scores. We can throw in a measure of which courses they've taken before. We cannot explain this away. And so I believe that it is being generated by the nature of the courses that we're teaching right now. Gendered performance differences, it turns out like this, are widespread in introductory STEM lecture courses. All of our introductory STEM lecture courses show these gendered performance differences, but they're not present in labs. And it's not just on our campus. We've now examined it on 4 other major research university campuses and found the same pattern. It's very likely that it exists here as well. I would encourage you to look. It's not the most difficult measurement to make. So what I think this is this kind of unexplained performance difference is a sign of classroom inequity. I think we have to figure out what's going on here and solve it. It's not okay for us to continue to teach in this way and not make adjustments for this. Okay. And I've listed up here on the slide a place where you can see a preprint with all the details about this analysis if you are as excited about it as I am. Excited about it. Make sure you understand what I mean by that. I mean excited, like upset, right? Not excited, like pleased, right? So that's some analysis examples. I'm going to finish up by talking about action, about ways in which we can put data to work. And this is one of the most exciting parts. This is where we will really be able to personalize. Supporting people's decision making. Telling stories to people about what's happened in the past to influence the way they think about the future and motivating change for them. Okay? So putting data to work is really the next frontier of this. Being able to use technology to put data in people's hands in different ways. Sometimes just pretty directly, here's the data, you go figure out what you want to do. But sometimes through more rich communications, like we've got the data, it tells us something we want to tell you. Right? So communicating the data in all kinds of ways to make personal connections and guide behavior change. We created this University of Michigan Digital Innovation Greenhouse to take good ideas that emerge on campus and transition them from innovation to infrastructure. From a small project in somebody's lab to something we use everywhere on campus, and to use those to personalize education at scale. So this greenhouse was born to solve a recurring problem. We had regularly had faculty members invent an information technology tool which makes education better, more personal, more engaged, maybe more effective. They even prove it works. They write some papers to show that it works. The research teams test them and demonstrate this, and then they're really ready to spread on the campus. Everybody else gets excited about them. They say, I want to use that too. The problem is then they run into this entrepreneurial valley of death between innovation and infrastructure. And they need a place to mature, to grow to scale like this. And we created the Digital Innovation Greenhouse to solve that problem, to create such a space for innovations to grow to scale. Okay? So how does DIG work? Well, it starts with the university community. This university teaching community is off doing what it's doing, coming up with innovations, creating new things. And when a group of faculty members creates a new tool, they can bring it into the greenhouse space. And this is kind of a model of what happens in the greenhouse. It includes those innovators and the pioneering adopters of these tools who work closely with the DIG team. The DIG team includes a set of software developers and user experience designers, behavioral scientists, and people who lead communities of practice. This is a very important part of the way it works. As we develop a tool, we work with the users very closely to make sure we're developing a tool that really serves their needs and meets the goals that they have. If we didn't have this opportunity to do it, we would go off on our own and invent something that we thought was the right thing. We'd bring it to the classroom, and they would say, what is this for? Right? You really have to work with users when doing this. Doing this work on a campus and not, for instance, off in a company is really powerful because we have a community of people around us to work with that we can collaborate with. So projects come in from innovators and their pioneering adopters. We work on them for a while within the greenhouse, and then the idea is they will gradually exit the greenhouse, go back out to university IT for support at scale. We build them up and we hand them off. After they work with university IT, there are other ways they could go to still larger scales. They may go off to university consortia, like Unison, a group that we work with on our campus. They may also go off to form startup companies and to be fed back into the university teaching community. So when we first built DIG, we thought of it as primarily about this technology creation cycle, working with innovators to grow things to scale and sending them back to the teaching community. But there's another branch to DIG that's very important that we hadn't recognized when we started. Once you have tools like this that are being used on your campus at scale, those tools themselves provide research opportunities. Once you have courses that have all this stuff plugged into them, it's really easy to come in and do a research project within that course. And so this has enabled a bunch of extramurally funded research to take place that was previously impossible. DIG makes that possible. And so along the side, we have the external university research community interested in understanding things like teaching and learning, but also things like behavioral science. So we have a researcher, Yan Chen, who works in our School of Information. Her area of research is what mechanisms promote participation in online communities. And she's worked with organizations like the Kiva Microlending Service to think about how could you get people to participate in that system. What she's doing now is experiments that are taking place on our campus to understand how you can get people to participate in online communities. And she does that with external research funding that allows her to connect up and use this and leads to research findings and publications. So having this happen on your campus has other effects other than just accomplishing the teaching mission of the campus. It also enables a variety of research. Okay. We do this work within what's called the Office of Academic Innovation at Michigan. This office has 3 laboratories in it. It has the Digital Innovation Greenhouse. It has a MOOC production facility called the Digital Education and Innovation Lab, and it has a gameful learning lab. If you're interested in gameful learning, I would really encourage you to take a look at what they're doing there in the gameful learning lab. Very cool work. It was born in May of 2015. It started with just a couple people locked in a little basement underneath a parking garage. Since that time, it has expanded substantially, and we now live on top of our library. This is the Digital Innovation Greenhouse space. You can see it's an open workspace that we live in. It's a lovely spot on the 8th floor of our library. We have the best view on campus. In fact, if you look very closely, you can see the Michigan Stadium lurking over there in the corner. We actually literally look down on the president's house here. We can see right into his backyard. So I have to say, he's never there. University presidents are never in their backyard. It's just a sad reality. An important feature of the greenhouse is that we have engaged very extensively with students. So we bring lots of students to work as fellows, as essentially interns. They like to be called fellows instead of interns. They think it's a better name, so we're happy to use it. We also involve them in activities like design jams and hackathons. We had one of these last Friday night where students were thinking about how they could create games around a tool that we have called Problem Roulette. Students are especially good at this. They're good at all kinds of research activities, but especially good at this because they know higher education. They live in it, right? So they have a lot of personal experience with it that they can bring to the table. Really neat thing to do. So this is a picture with a bunch of our student fellows working with some of our senior staff. The DIG projects that we have going on span a wide range. We started with just 3 things, and I'm going to tell you about a couple of those. And then we've continued to add new projects to this, and that has allowed us to continue to expand the activities in the greenhouse. Each of these projects has brought with it new resources into the greenhouse as well to enable us to do this. When you think about putting data to work, I like to imagine this kind of spectrum of information agency. And like most spectra, it has a couple of ends. On one end, you might give people the data directly. Say, okay, students and faculty, you want to learn something from this data, I'll just give it to you. And that sounds great, because they can exactly answer the questions they have, but it has a drawback. Like, not everybody's very good at using data, right? So that's good, but it has a drawback that people might not be able to use it very well. So on the other end of the spectrum of information agency, you don't give any agency to the people who are deciding. Instead, you give experts the data. You let them interpret the data and make the decisions for the students and faculty. Tell them what to do, right? I think in some ways, traditional institutional research is a little like this. The data is not shared with other people. It's only used to make high-level decisions. I think the optimal place to be is in between. Give the data to both sides. Give it to experts so they can help interpret it, and then let the experts help the students interpret it. So the decision-making still belongs on the student's side, but it is shaped by behavioral science and choice architecture and nudges. Right? We can learn from the data and try to help people make good decisions, but not make them for them. Just help them make good decisions. So this might feel like it's new, but in fact it's old, because academic advisors have always been doing this kind of work. They have a lot of information. The student comes. They don't quite tell them what to do, but they shape what they're doing. It's not entirely new. Similar kind of thing. So I'm going to tell you quickly about 2 things that provide information to individuals, and then about one that provides advice. So the first is the Academic Reporting Toolkit. Its purpose is to give people data that can help inform their academic decisions, and it works right now by providing students with information about courses that they might take. So every course that we have on our campus has a course card like this that tells students who has taken this course in the past, what courses did they take before this, and after this, what did they go on to major in, what's the enrollment like, who has taught this in the past. And students can see all this information so they can use it in forming their opinions about courses. We're now adding to this academic reporting toolkit more ways that people can get more information about what's been going on campus so that they can form their own opinions and make their own judgments. A second kind of tool is something called Student Explorer. This is an early warning system. This is something that emerged very rapidly in a lot of learning analytics applications. It lets an advisor who has a list of students that they're responsible for keep track of their performance in all of the classes that they're in. So they might notice that some students are doing fine in most of their classes, but maybe there's one class that you would like to check out. And it lets them then drill down into those classes to see where the student is in comparison to the current average in the class. then they can drill down farther to individual assignments and see what the student has been doing. So it's an early warning system that lets advisors keep track of their students. Most of our advisors use this when they're sitting with students. So they'll sit down and say, how are you doing? And the student says, fine, because that's what students always say. And then they can say, well, let's take a look, right? And then they can have a conversation about what's going on. It's a fairly straightforward kind of use of data. At another level, we can think about using expert interpretation of data and then providing advice to people. And this eCoach tool that I work on uses computer-tailored communication to provide coaching for students with a goal of both equity and student success. So I want you to imagine having a campus in which personalized expert coaching was provided for every single student that could connect them with timely feedback and encouragement and advice. It would be a nice thing if you could do that. eCoach is an effort to do that. It doesn't get all the way to the place you'd like to be, but it gets us a lot closer to it than we've been before. So it gathers information about every student who's on campus and provides them with personalized messaging of a variety of kinds. So one example is we can provide people with checklists of the things they might be needing to do in a large statistics class like this and keep track of what they've been up to and whether they've accomplished all these things. We can provide them with advice about how to do the different elements of a class through a mechanism that is personalized so it knows whether they've actually been engaging in these things or not. We can provide them with feedback about their performance in the context of what's actually going on in the class and discuss whether that's getting them to the place where they would like to be. Talk about what they can do now if they're not having the result that they would like to have. A good example of a kind of coaching that we're doing more of is helping students be more strategic about their approach to study. So a social psychology graduate student created this strategic mindset intervention that works with all the students in our classes on preparing for exams. So it has in mind the idea that students should do two things when they get ready for an exam. First, they should think about what they're going to use to get ready, what kinds of resources they're going to use. And then they should think about how and when they're going to use them. And then execute that plan. So come up with a good plan and then execute it. So it asks them to think about what resources they're going to use to prepare for the exam, and then to plan how they're going to use those resources, and walks them through this process. It says, here's all the things you could use in this class. Which ones are you going to choose? After they choose them, it asks them to reflect on why they've chosen these things. And that gives us an opportunity to interact with them. If they say, for example, I'm going to highlight every sentence in my book again, we might want to respond that that's not a very effective way to study. Right? We have the opportunity at least to do that. So they write a little bit about why they want to use the different features that they're going to use. Then we ask them to think about what they're going to do, where they're going to do it, and when they're going to do it. And the version that we have now just pops up their Google Calendar and says, okay, you said you were going to spend 6 hours studying. When are you going to do it? Right? We're not forcing them to do it. We're just trying to shape their process toward being able to do this better. And it clearly has an impact on student performance participating in this. Okay? And then afterwards, we can reflect on their exam with them, think about what it is they might want to do next, and so on. All of this is built on a digital health coaching heritage that was established at the University of Michigan. It allows us to tailor on what we say and how we say it, and even who says it. So we can provide this tailored information in the form of testimonials from peers. When we do this work, we combine expertise from the instructional side, what do the instructors know about it, but also from behavior change experts who know how to help people change behaviors to things that they want to have happen. We've been using this since 2012 for more than 15,000 students on campuses at scale in a way now, but I would say we're still learning how to use these technologies. It's very subtle stuff. There's a lot to think about in this. So when you think about using a new education technology, that's important to remember. You're probably working with a first version of it. And instead of just saying, does it work or not, you have to think about what you would do to make it work better. Okay, so we're thinking about that too. We're also working on the gender performance differences we see in our introductory science classes by implementing values affirmation interventions using this tool. So these kinds of values affirmation interventions ask a student to do some writing about their values, and so it works through the eCoach platform in this way. It asks students to select the values that are most important in their lives from a list of commonly held values, and then to write about why those values are important in their lives. And then they get to continue to see these values that they've called out through the term. We're now using this kind of values affirmation intervention with more than 1,000 students in a random controlled trial to see whether or not it has any impact on the gender performance differences that we see. This is another example of the way having a framework like this allows us to do research projects that were previously inaccessible. Okay. So I have told you about a bunch of the different things that are going on at the University of Michigan. I think there are things that are emerging and happening all across higher education. I think the future of education is definitely going to be affected by data. We all have tools now which will enable us to expose information to everyone so that when people come into a university situation like this, they'll be able to learn from what's happened with everyone before, not just from the few people they happen to talk to. We'll be able to explore and represent what happens on our campus in a much richer and more multidimensional way. When we do that, we will encourage better behavior, right? Instead of just pursuing GPA, people will pursue broader things like intellectual diversity and disciplinary depth. And our campus, and perhaps yours too, will become a kind of laboratory for education, where every time we try a new thing, we have the opportunity to really learn from that new experience. Instead of just doing it and saying, I don't know, I kind of like that one, let's keep doing that. Teaching and learning can become more evidence-based and continuously assessed and refined. And what we're doing at Michigan is trying to make the University of Michigan a place which is a center for doing this, a place which can provide guidance to other institutions as well as doing the work for our own students. And I'm going to stop there and thank you and be happy to take some questions. Sure. Make sure I'm not in the...
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Xiufeng Liu. I'm professor in the Department of Learning and Instruction and also director for the Center for Educational Innovation. So I'm going to facilitate we have about 25 minutes discussion. And so if any of you would like to ask a question, please proceed to the microphone. We have two on the sides. So this is going to be a kind of informal exchange Q&A period. So don't have to be intimidated.
There's one up here.
Go ahead, please.
One of the pieces of your tool is faculty grades. So I assume faculty are required to submit grades. So I'm wondering if that's always been the case, and if you had any political issues with that, and do all faculty do that in a timely way, and where do they put those grades into?
Right. So the one measure of performance that comes out of every one of our classes on our campus is grades. And the systems we have for reporting grades are long-standing. There used to be a box in front of the LSNA building. I had to put it in by a certain time. Right now, it's all done electronically. The access of grades to students is something that has been controversial on our campus. Now, it probably shouldn't be controversial. We're a public institution. Anyone can FOIA those grades. In fact, students have repeatedly done so and released the grade information to their peers. But there are faculty members on campus who are uncomfortable releasing information about grades to students. They're concerned that students would misuse those in some naive kind of way. They would say, oh, that course gives low grades, I'm never going to take that class. Or they would only pursue a course that gives out high grades, right? I think that shows a lack of understanding of students and perhaps a lack of respect for students to think that they would be solely driven by that kind of information. And for me, I would like to see that information all released to students. We're working on doing that right now. So,
Thank you. Louis?
Maybe I can stand here.
For people who have questions, you may just step down earlier, and then we can.
Okay, first of all, thank you very much for a very, very interesting lecture. And I think it so nicely illustrates the iterative nature of research in and of itself and the relationship to practice. So where you find something, then you move on to something else, then you go back, and then you do
Exactly,
practice, and then you go on. And it's just a terrific example. I have two questions, one of which is very easy, and that's where was the initial funding for this large project? Okay, and then let me go to the next part of this question, which is, does your database allow for the short and long-term outcomes for students? In other words, for example, the sort of structure of opportunity and the way in which courses are put together and aligned, and who encounters which course first and second, and who takes that early chemistry course, and who moves on to organic, and you understand what I mean. And the relationship between that sort of set of issues around the ways in which people encounter courses, and who, who intends to major in STEM, who actually majors in STEM, what kind of outcomes they have is broken out by gender and controlling for everything, all the relevant things. So in that database, can you actually look at the kinds of issues of major, intended major, outcome major, actual major, and then what people do once they leave the University of Michigan? Is that possible to do that, or do you not have those data?
It is. There are complications with doing it. So let me take your second question first, and then I'll come back and talk a little bit about funding. This question of student persistence and in a field like STEM, you will read everywhere that at most institutions, 60% of the students who come to college intending to major in STEM don't. It's a famous number, right? I have to tell you, though, that 60% of the students who come to college intending to major in English don't, too, because people change their majors. So I have always found this question a little more complicated than it's usually reported, and I think that some of the people who do STEM education work, almost like the great challenge of having 60% of people change, but I think it's a little bit more complicated than they often claim. So what we've tried to do is to recognize that people's interests evolve for a lot of reasons. I mean, many people come to college with no knowledge of most of the majors that exist. They've never heard of them. So of course there will be many people who come intending to do one thing and do something else. I mean, that's a good thing in a way. So what we're trying to do is to get the best possible understanding of what people are thinking at different points. So when they apply to college, they may express interest in certain fields, right? That's pretty much governed by what they did in high school. Then once they get to college, they start to encounter the opportunities of studying in different fields, and they even register for classes. And that's a pretty big commitment. You know, when you take that introductory physics or chemistry class or whatever, you're saying, okay, I'm going to give this a real try. I'm going to spend a semester on it. That's a pretty serious commitment. So if a student takes a first semester physics course and not a second semester course, something probably happened, right? In particular because that pair of classes is required for almost every major that requires any physics. You know what I mean? So there are places where it looks like you really can measure departure in a more meaningful way. They're quite contextual. So each, for physics it's that, for math it's something else, right? But you really have to understand what's going on with student flows to pick this apart and to begin to do it. So we have done that, and we've shown, for example, that not only in introductory physics are female students receiving lower grades than, let's say, equivalent male students, but they are also more grade sensitive than male students in the context of physics. That may not be true in every discipline. Right? So you really have to ask kind of pretty specific questions. So that grade penalty that we see is having an outsized influence, both because it's happening, but then also because female students, in physics at least, tend to be more grade sensitive. When they get a lower grade, they're more inclined to explain that by identifying as not a physics person.
Exactly. Saying they don't belong.
When I got a low grade, when I was in college, I thought, boy, that was a stupid class. Right, which I think might be a slightly gendered response. So it is possible to use this kind of student record data to learn a lot about what's going on. It's not completely trivial, though. I mean, especially these intent questions, because students themselves don't really know what they want to do when they're coming to college for the first time, and I think it's okay that they don't. So this is a place where I think I'd like to be able to get new data that we don't have. We don't ask people at the end of college very much, what they think about the pathway. Were they like chased off a pathway they wanted to be on? You know, that's when we should be asking, when they're reflecting back a little bit more. My own daughter went to here I'm going to use anecdote, okay? So my own daughter went to college wanting to major in biology and took a linguistics class, and that was it. Right? She became a linguist. And it wasn't because she was chased away. It's because she loved linguistics, so it's not all bad. Now, let me come back to the money. Yeah. Yes, it comes back to money. So we were very fortunate in one regard, and in another, we've taken advantage of opportunities that are available to everyone. The fortunate part is that the University of Michigan is going through a bicentennial right now. And as we prepared for this bicentennial, the university president and provost set aside a $50 million third century fund. Half of it, $25 million, was to go to research projects, and half of it was to go to education work. And so there was money available on campus to do new things that wasn't normally available. And that gave us the money to start the task force and seeded some of these projects, right? But we also have recognized that now that we have this up and running, we can be very competitive for research and development grants. When we set off to try and use these kinds of social psychological interventions to affect gendered performance difference, I was able to go to the NSF and say, I want to do this very large experiment, and look, we can do it because we've already got this tool in place in these large classes. Here's how many people are enrolled. This is how large our sample size will be. You know, it made it very plausible that we would be able to execute that project, and so we got a grant that somebody else didn't because of that. So they go a little hand in hand.
Okay, thank you very much.
Sure.
Go ahead, please.
Hey, so earlier you mentioned that you want a metric for effort. So what are your thoughts on using surveys for that, like maybe how much effort you put in each course? And also, I'm just curious, have you ever looked into seeing how grades might change based on what time of the day the lecture is? Because I know I go to my 2 p.m. lectures a lot more than the 8 a.m.
Those are great questions. So the first one about, I'm sorry, I've forgotten your first question. Please repeat it quickly.
A metric for effort?
Effort, yes. Okay, great. So we do have in our student evaluation system something that is a measure of how hard you worked in the class, right? And so students are already giving us that kind of survey information. So one of the metrics for effort that we're adding up is you took all these classes, the students in these classes said these ones were hard and these ones were easy. So we can kind of add that up and give you an effort point factor or something, right? Some kind of number that represents the integrated effort that you had across your career based on that survey. Might not be perfect, but it's a place to start. Another suggestion that's been made, which I like maybe less, but it's interesting, there are some courses that are graded harshly and some courses that are not. So one way of thinking about it would be to say, how many courses did you take that on average give very low grades? Right, to sort of add that up. If you take a lot of those courses and you still end up with a high GPA, that's different from getting a high GPA when you take courses where everybody gets a high GPA. Right? So that there's a kind of, it's not effort, but there's a thing there to do, which is interesting. The learning management system provides a new mechanism for measuring effort. So for example, I think it should be possible to make a measurement of how many words or pages you wrote on graded assignments during your career as an undergraduate. That's only one kind of effort, but it would be really interesting to see how much does that vary across campus. How much writing are people doing? And how is that different for different majors? I know that our science students don't do enough writing now because they come out unable to write well, and I would like to see them able to write better. And so if we could measure, we could get into the learning management system and see what you're doing, what work you've been asked to do, and add that up in some kind of way, I think that might be really interesting. But I think self-report is pretty powerful. The students are pretty good about self-report. So for example, even courses that students say are hard, there are some courses that they say are hard but that they don't really work a ton on because they're just exams. So they cram for a couple nights before each exam, and the rest of the semester they're not really working very much. And there might be another course that gives everybody a high grade, but that they work like crazy because they're all really engaged and everybody loves the class, right? So student self-report is a pretty powerful tool, and I'd like to see us leverage it more.
Thank you. Amanda?
Thank you. Really, really interesting and thought-provoking talk. I guess my question has to do with, I love the feedback between the research and the implementation and then back to more research projects. So I guess I'm wondering about how much it's being implemented. And I'm particularly interested in the students' implementation of the tools to help them learn to improve, and I guess even more specifically, the social psychology intervention
Sure.
with the values. Like, how is that just an experiment that you're recruiting people for, or is that being used more widespread?
Sure. So, so all of this is emerging. It's new, and so each of these tools is being made available to the community, and we're gradually spreading their use. So the way we have spread the eCoach tool is to work extensively with, the ART tool, the one that gives course information, is to work extensively with student organizations to advertise it. So for instance, when our faculty resisted releasing certain kinds of information to students, we worked with student government. And student government went to faculty government and said, we want this information. And faculty government was unwilling to say to students, oh no, you can't have that information, right? They would say that to me, but not to students. So getting students as advocates for it. We just launched the latest version of ART 2.0 because we're just starting backpacking for fall registration. And the Michigan Daily, the student newspaper, featured a front page article about the new features that were available in ART 2.0. So they're doing the work of helping to spread the use of the tool and to have people think in new ways about how they might like to use the tool. The eCoach tool, the way we use it in two different environments right now. Most of the work has been done on coaching students through very large classes. So we work with the instructional team of the class to create a coach that welcomes the student into the course when they arrive and then speaks to them about the things they're going to do in the course, through the pathway of that class, until eventually they complete the course and receive a final grade, right? And then they leave the coach. So they're in it during the class. We have done this now for a whole series of large classes on campus. We're really focusing on recruiting all of the first-year classes that people encounter because they're very high stakes and important. Also, I think if we can teach people some of these habits in those classes, then they can go use them without a tool later on. The interventions that we're using, we are making available to all students who are in these coached classes, right? In a case like the values affirmation intervention, we're doing a full-on random controlled trial with all of the students. So every student who comes into it gets either the values affirmation or a randomized control treatment. And we're doing that because we really need to know if this works, right? If we find that it works, of course, we're going to make it available to everyone and see how we can use it. Getting students to participate in things has been an interesting, we're gradually learning how to incentivize students to do that. So in the courses where we work extensively with the instructional teams, those teams typically set aside 1 or 2 points of extra credit. And then the whole group that's developing this coach thinks about, what do we really want to get people to do this term? And then you give them credit for that, right? So there's 1 or 2 things during the term that you ask them to do, and you give them extra credit for it. And that typically motivates 80 or 85% participation, which is pretty good for these kind of tools.
Thank you very much for a very interesting talk. I have 2 questions. One is more of a theoretical nature. I really applaud your emphasis on personalizing education in this large-scale introductory science courses. But I wonder, what is the how do you operationalize personalizing education in a new way? If you take perhaps more traditional concept of personalization and specifically looking from humanities, we might have a different notion what personalized education is. And I wonder to what extent you thought about the very concept and how you operationalize it. What is the metrics or new metrics, or perhaps the new technologies are really redefining the very notion what personalized education is. So that's more theoretical question. And the second one, I wonder whether you can share any kind of information with us from students on the impact of your experiments.
Sure. So on the first question, this point about what is personalization. So personalization means that in some way, elements of the system of education are responsive to the individual nature of students, meaning that they're different in some way, right? So that personalization could be built into, it could take really any form. So if it was in a small course, that personalization might come about because the instructor comes to know that student as an individual in a bunch of ways, in personal ways, with a background and interests, in intellectual ways, how they're thinking about things, perhaps how they write. You come to know the individual student, and then you change your interaction with the student because of what you know about the student, so that your interaction with each individual student is somewhat different. It's personalized in that way. It's made unique by having those interactions in that way. So I think that it's possible to think of anything that makes the experience of each individual student different, a form of personalization. Now, some are fairly trivial, and some are much deeper. So a fairly trivial form would be what a lot of cognitive tutor systems do. So if, for example, you're teaching a subject where solving simple problems or questions is one of the things you're going to ask students to do, you can feed students questions until you can see that they can answer this kind of question correctly, and then you stop asking them that kind, and you start asking them another kind. And that happens differently for each student. That's a kind of personalization. It's responding to the individual responses of each individual student, but it's not very deep, right? It's okay, but it's not very deep. When we're building this coaching tool, we're trying to think in a manner that's closer to what we would like to do if that student came and sat in front of us and we knew them and we could speak to them as an individual. So we're trying to use, because it allows us to express ourselves in forms that are kind of like human communication, when we create the content, we try to imagine different students sitting in front of us and what we would say if they came to office hours. And there's nothing in it that's artificial intelligence or anything. It really is just humans writing messages intended for certain kinds of students and then being able to deliver those messages to the students. So the downside of this kind of personalization is that it doesn't have all of the subtle abilities that an experienced instructor have to understand an individual who's with them. The upside is that it actually is able to acquire data about the 700 people in my class and attend to it all, hold it all kind of in its mind, and then do something about each individual student. I can't do that. But with the help of technology, we can do something that personalizes the experience for all the students. So I think it's a great question, and it's very, it can be a very deep question about what is happening with technology now. I mean, this personalization we're talking about, we're way behind what's happening out kind of in the commercial world. When you go to any of your favorite social media websites, they're deeply personalizing things. Maybe not, well, maybe deeply is the wrong word. They're doing it a lot. Let me put it that way. I'm not sure it's so subtle or sophisticated, but they're doing it a lot so that that experience is responding to everything you've ever done before in really complicated ways. And what does that mean? How should we think about it? And then you had a second question. I'm sorry, I've let it slip out of my mind. The theory was too big for me. Right, so data on impact of experiments. So there are a variety of different, so we're doing a lot of things, first of all. And so we have made measurements of the impact of these tools on a variety of outcomes. So one kind of outcome is just performance in classes. And that's the first thing we looked at. We built coaches to try and help students perform better in classes. Did they help students perform better in classes? And so we have run both very careful random controlled trials of some elements of that and also done some quasi-experimental design kind of work to see if we can understand the impact of these tools on students. And in a typical kind of case of course coaching, what we see happen is that students who engage heavily with the coaching tool, even accounting for everything we know about their background and their prior performance, improve their performance by anywhere between 0.3 and a half a letter grade. So there's a significant, not colossal, but significant improvement in student performance that seems to be associated with working with these tools. Individual tools like that exam playbook tool that I told you about, those can be tested in simple random controlled trials where some students get it and some students don't. So it's really a randomized experiment. That's a much better experimental design for understanding impact. And they also show improvements of student performance on exams, about 5% improvements of student performance. Then the other kind of influence is to see how it changes the student experience. So what do students think about having these tools? Do they like having these tools? And of course, this varies a bit with individuals. There are some students who have no interest in this kind of coaching tool. They just don't, it doesn't matter to them. They don't care. But there are other students who really find it valuable and who will testify to how it did very useful things for them in helping them get through these courses. So I think it's a mixed bag, and as we become better at personalizing, maybe we will learn to leave some people alone, that the right way to personalize is to not mess with them. But right now we make it available to all the students.
I'm going to ask you the final question.
Okay.
For your last few minutes. I'm very interested in the spectrum of information agency you presented. On the one hand is kind of user, right?
Yep.
Students,
Give them the data.
faculty, and then the expert using data to develop tools, right?
Yep.
Do you have examples for faculty? You have not presented any faculty examples, like what kind of data faculty may find useful, what kind of tools?
So one of the things that excites faculty members on our campus the most is their own classes, right? And so, first of all, I should say that if you're teaching pretty small classes, then these analytic approaches may have nothing to tell you. You may already know everything about your class, right? So it's mostly people who are teaching really large courses that are tough to kind of get your arms around and really understand. So we have begun to work on developing a kind of course report kind of tool that would enable an instructor who maybe has just been assigned to teach their first really large class to give them a whole bunch of information about what's happened in the past in that class. Who are the students who are coming in? What is the array of their different backgrounds so that they can think about who they're dealing with, not just see a bunch of faces on the first day and think they're all the same, but to recognize that they come from really different backgrounds. To see in the past how those backgrounds have related to performance in the class and what students who take this class are actually headed for. So knowing what the students who are taking your class are preparing themselves for is really important, or should be really important for your instruction. Then being able to see how things that they do in the class affect student performance. People are interested. They really want to know. They may not want to know enough that they will do the research on their own. Right? That's a big ask for a lot of people. Everybody's super busy. But if we provide tools that make it kind of easy to see things like that, they want to know. They're really curious about it. But they may not do the work themselves. So it's kind of on that spectrum. If we just throw the data at them, it'll go in a closet, and they'll never do anything with it because they won't have time. But if we can have some experts think about what are the kinds of questions people ask and make it easy to answer those questions, then I think we will see a lot more engagement from people. I'll just give, one example is these gender performance differences. So we first observed them in physics. We didn't look anywhere else because we were just looking at physics. And we started talking about it, and a lot of people in other disciplines thought physics was really biased against women and students shouldn't take physics. And then we discovered it was present in a whole bunch of disciplines. And since that's been discovered, many people on our campus are thinking about what to do about it. Our business school, for example, uses first semester economics as one of the tools for deciding who should transfer into our business school. And there's a big gender performance difference, and they have been very concerned about diversity in their student body. And now they know one of the reasons why they have less diversity in their student body than they would like. Because this course is giving people different grades, and consequently people are not being brought into their program. So they're really thinking about it now too. So finding things that are salient for individuals is what makes people interested in data. When you've got a question you want to answer, then you look at the data. Right? So I think that's the key.
So that's all the time we have today. So let's thank Tim McKay again for a very insightful presentation today.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.